With all this talk of narcissism and narcissistic abuse on social media platforms, are we overusing the term? Aren't we all a little bit narcissistic? In this episode of Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse, we're going to discuss what pathological narcissism actually is. We're also going to get into boundary setting when it comes to living around a narcissistic family member. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm your host, Dr. Carrie Kermakovoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience and a narcissistic abuse survivor. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes and leave us a review and let us know what you think of the podcast. Consider donating the cost of a cup of coffee in show of your support of our mission, which is to help set abuse victims free from toxic relationships. So, let's listen in to this replay of a live TikTok. I have been listening to Dr. Gregory Lester talk about personality disorders. What constitutes a personality disorder? How does it differ from a mental condition? How does it differ from depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder? What is borderline personality disorder versus narcissistic personality disorder or obsessive personality disorder? There's actually 10 of them, 10 different personality disorders. What makes those different than a mental condition? The different types of personality disorders in the past, it's been based on criterion or categories. And now they're suggesting that they look at 4 areas of functioning and assess people against those 4 areas. And that people with personality disorders have problems in all 4 areas. Now, what's interesting, and I had not really fully put this together before. I mean, we talk a lot about, can they change? Is it fixable? All these types of details. But what I haven't really appreciated before was the difference between a mental condition and a disorder. Why is it called a disorder? Well, it's actually because there's a very logical thing that really makes a lot of sense. When you get sick with something, say that you get COVID, or you get a disease, maybe you have heart disease, or you have asthma, or whatever the condition is, you're very aware something is wrong. It's internally wrong with you, and you feel not yourself. That is a condition. It's something that's happening to you and that you then experience. And you identify it as that. You say, this isn't me. This is how I normally don't function. The same happens with depression or anxiety. If you've ever met somebody who's had a depressive episode who has been highly anxious, they're going to say the same thing. They're going to say, something's really wrong with me. I don't feel like myself. I feel bad. I feel really bad. You work to get rid of the symptoms. You work to get rid of the hopelessness, the blueness, the feeling like you can't get out of bed. All of those symptoms of depression, you work to get rid of them. Disorders, however, are what clinicians call pervasive. What we mean by that is we mean that it's part of a person's traits, personality traits. It's hardwired into them. Just like you may be an extrovert or an introvert, maybe you're a person who's very outgoing, or maybe you're very shy. Maybe you're someone who's really good under pressure, or you're somebody who sort of freezes. These are traits, personality traits that all of us have, and we all vary on how strong or how weak these various traits are. Well, a personality disorder is basically an issue with these traits. Instead of having a full repertoire of all the traits that a normal person would have, they are deficient on some key ones that cause them problems. And what happens because they lack these traits, these key traits, they end up being not very adaptable, and they struggle being flexible. So there's a really great analogy that Dr. Lester in his training gives that I love. I think it's highly appropriate. Sure, it dates us, but imagine, for example, if you're a person who has a musical talent, but your talent is only one song. That's all you can play is one, but you play it really well, but you play one song. Let's pretend that song is a theme song to a horror movie. You're excellent at this theme song. Now, when we are in a scary situation and you pull out that theme song, it fits, it works. It's totally appropriate. But say that you show up at a funeral or a wedding and you play this theme song. That's not going to go over well. That's going to be a problem. That's what's happening with individuals who have a personality disorder. The traits that they have, the ones that they happen to be sufficient on, don't play well in every situation. When it's the right situation, they look fine. They look normal. They look like everybody else. But when they end up being in a situation in which they're lacking the critical skills that they need, say, for example, intimacy, like being part of a partnership, then their skill sets don't play so well and they end up creating problems. But one thing that Dr. Lester said is that you know that you've met somebody who's deficient in personality traits, who is struggling with adaptability as well as flexibility, is when you see these three things consistently show up in their lives. When you see there's this continuity of upsetness, something's always going wrong and moves from crisis to crisis. You know the type that you see, they seem to attract crisis, or there's always a new crisis. But when there's this chronic set of upsetness, watch also for confusion. They tend to create, you don't know what's real. There's this practice of deception. They're one way with one person and they're another way in another person, or they act really secretive, but there's this just pervasive sense of confusion. Or even when they talk and you hear this word salad and you can't really figure out what's what and what's real. That level of just not knowing, that confusion. And then the third thing to watch for is chronic conflict. They tend to be, in fact, cluster B personality disorders are now be considered called antagonistic. The whole group, which is histrionic, borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, as well as narcissistic personality disorder, they're now considered antagonistic. They're the opposite of agreeable. They tend to just be very difficult. They tend to not be cooperative. I found it fascinating because to me, this just makes it so much simpler. And it also really helps address the question of, should I hold out hope? If you find yourself in a relationship with a narcissist, do you stick it out and stay? What do you look for change? Is change even a realistic expectation? If this is actually deficiency, which is something is literally missing as far as when it comes to functioning, not missing in the person, but missing in functioning, if they're really going to have a lack of empathy, chronic lack of empathy, a chronic lack of self-reflection, which, by the way, if you can't analyze and look at yourself and have a perspective, how do you change? That'd be like going into the gym and having no weights, so you never know what weights you're lifting, and you have no ability to know whether or not you're doing better than last week or the month before or not. You have no ability to observe. If you have no ability to observe, then it really is very difficult to make any changes. Doesn't that make more sense to think about it that way? I just found that so much simpler and answered a lot of questions, like a lot of questions. A lot of social media uses covert narcissist to talk about a certain type of narcissist. What is that? If you listen to Dr. Ramani and other people like her, you're going to hear what they're really talking about is a vulnerable narcissist. It's the opposite to a grandiose narcissist. A grandiose is somebody that's larger than life, feels like everything's going right for them. They brag constantly how great things are. They're the life of the party. They seem to be successful. Maybe they're really not, but they seem to be anyway. The vulnerable narcissist is the inverse of that. They're the ones that have collapsed. Life has not turned out the way that they wanted. They're the perpetual victim. It's always poor me. Why is life unfair? Why can't I ever get a break? You'll hear a lot of that perseveration around that thought. What's hard about a vulnerable narcissist, we think we've met somebody who's sensitive because they're talking about problems, whereas grandiose narcissists don't talk about problems. They tend to brag a lot. So we think because we hear about the problems and how it's going wrong for them, that we've met somebody who has insight, that maybe somebody who may have empathy. What we don't realize is that they don't. It's just a same egocentric view of the world, only instead of how it goes well, they're always talking about how it goes wrong. The other difference about them from the grandiose is going to be more overtly aggressive, probably, most often. More like to do gaslighting, make jokes at your expense, all those types of things. Whereas a covert's going to use passive-aggressive techniques to get even with you. They still both feel life is unfair. Both don't want you to get ahead. Both of you see you as competition, but a vulnerable narcissist is more like to get you in the back. They're going to set you up or deliberately sabotage things. For example, say you have a really big event that you really wanted them to be present. They're likely not to show, and then have a good excuse that you can't supposedly be mad at them. So that's what a vulnerable narcissist. I don't know why the field's changing terminologies, and I know that that's kind of going to throw people. And I think you're going to hear a lot more information about a covert narcissist when really you're talking about a vulnerable narcissist. How do you leave a narcissist? That's tough. Honestly, that's tough. And that's the part where we really don't get a lot of support or understanding in the public. I don't know how many videos I've had where we talk about the difficulties leaving and people just say, up and leave. What's your problem? Why do you just not leave? What most people really don't understand is that narcissists are good at trapping us. They're good at getting us into very exposed positions, whether it is with a baby, or we buy a house together, we get into business with them, we commingle our finances. And because they move from problem to problem to problem to problem, then we end up getting into problems with them deeper and deeper, making us sort of entrapped in these very complicated situations with them, which makes it extremely difficult to extricate ourselves. And on top of it, because they tend to be very manipulative and distrusting, and they anticipate you getting them back because that's how they approach the world, very competitively. They're suspicious, and they put us into positions where we're being watched. I know that I felt like I couldn't take phone calls in front of my ex. I stopped communicating with people because I was with him 24/7, literally with him, because he was a serial cheater. So I couldn't trust being by myself, but that also meant that I never had any privacy to take phone calls. So that then meant my social world was less, which meant I had less support. So those types of situations sort of get going, and before we know it, we end up being, in trouble, and we're really stuck and we don't have a lot of good support. So it takes planning. I have a couple suggestions. One is please keep whatever your plans are to yourself. I know it's tempting when you're really hurting and you're angry to want to threaten this person, but to say, if you don't pull your act together, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, or you don't know what I have, or so-and-so is going to help me, or whatever. We let the cat out of the bag because we want to sort of get even, or convince them to change, or warn them that something's going to happen if they don't get their act together. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. What will happen is, because they are viewing like you against them and everybody against them, they will then make sure to sabotage those plans. They'll get ahead of them and ruin them for you, and they'll get revenge. Most likely they'll get revenge. So that's rule number one. Please keep your plans to yourself. Second piece of advice, you need to be strategic and you need to start planning way out in advance. View this like a marathon, getting out like a marathon, like you get ready for a run. And you're out of shape and you're not fit. You're going to have to approach it like you got a lot of things to figure out, what your legal rights are. So make an appointment with an attorney. Even if you never divorce, it's always a good idea to know your legal rights. If you're in a partnership, your partner's going to tell you the wrong information. So find out for your area where you're living what your rights are, how to leave if you decide to do it. Doesn't mean you have to do it. Just get information. There's nothing wrong with having information. The second thing is start to make a financial plan. A lot of us end up in situations where we're being financially abused, where our access to money has been limited or stifled, or we're not even allowed to work. So start to make a plan of how you're going to get some financial assistance or financial support, or to be able to financially support yourself. I know, and that probably means taking this person on, but begin to strategize around those things. And if their children are involved, make sure you begin to think what you're going to do with custody-related issues. So you have to plan ahead. Now, how do you actually get out? Because often that's pretty tricky. Again, you have to take planning. There are 7 different ways that you can, that Dr. Kristen Milstead outlines in her book, Why Can't I Just Leave? Highly recommend that book, by the way. If you're feeling confused, you're feeling trapped, or you don't know why you can't stop thinking about this person, that's the book you want to get. In that book, she outlines 7 different ways. I'm going to tell you personally, I used I think it's way number 5, I used a life event. That's how I got out. I knew that he may discard me, and that would be another really great plan. I knew I probably couldn't just up and walk out. Potentially could have gotten really bad for me. So I waited for an opening. I literally waited and watched for an opening. And then when an opening came, I stepped through it. So whatever way you do it, there's no right way or wrong way. I, for a long time, felt really like sheepish, like embarrassed, like somehow because I didn't walk out, that I wasn't brave. these people often are dangerous. So whatever way you do it is a good way for you. So no judgment. So you have to start, I started planning a year ahead before my opening. I knew I wanted to leave. I knew I needed to leave, but I waited. I waited until the right moment and everything lined up. And then when it lined up, you need to be ready. You need to be ready. That's the third thing. You need to be ready to walk out. When it all lines up and you see the opening, you have to take it because you don't know when you're going to get it again. That was the scariest moment in my life, truly. And it probably will be your scariest moment too. But that's what you need to do in order to do this. You have to watch, wait, and then take it when it happens.
I had never felt more alone during the years that I'd spent in the abusive relationship. Shame and fear cut me off from the rest of the world and made it difficult to share what was going on. Are you going through something similar? If so, then you're going to want to read my book, Love You More, The Harrowing Tales of Lies, Sex Addiction, and Double Cross. It's a true story of what happened to me. You'll discover that you're not alone and that you'll find out also what it took for me to finally escape. You can buy the book at all the major online stores or buy it directly from me and get a discount. For info on where to get your copy, please see the link in my bio.
If you start to get better and you set limits and you emotionally detach, you do all the things that you need to do to get healthier, the toxic people in your life is going to be very angry with you, very angry, because two things. And I thought this is fascinating. So let me kind of give you a little psychology in the background of this. People with personality traits are doing a lot of what Dr. David Schnarf in his book, The Passionate Marriage, called borrowed functioning. We all do it, by the way. They're not the only ones doing it. We're all doing it. If you've ever felt insecure and you ask somebody to tell you you're okay, does this make me look fat? You're borrowing function in that moment. It's very common. We all do it. But the more ill you are in your symptomologies, the more deficient you are in your personality traits and lacking adaptability and flexibility, the more you're going to borrow functioning from other people. So people on the end with higher personality disorder traits are borrowing a lot from those around us. That's why, by the way, we're called supply, because they're borrowing, they're shoring themselves up so that they're not so bored, so that life is exciting, so that they feel like they're all that special, all these things. They're borrowing from us. But when we begin to, before I jump to my next thought, when they borrow from us, it helps them feel like themselves. They feel a little more whole, a little more stable when those around them are doing all this shoring up. Imagine if you had a house that's leaning and you get a jack and you actually jack it up on that one corner that it's leaning, it's now going to be a little more level and stable. Doesn't mean the house has a good foundation, but at least temporarily it feels a little more stable. But if you took the jack away, then the house is back to leaning and everything's off and it's not working so well. Doors don't close, cabinets don't close, things roll across the floor, not doing so well. So they want you to get the jack back under them. When you set boundaries and do things that are good for you, you're removing the support from them and they're not functioning so well. So what do they do to get you to do it? Well, they pressure you. They'll complain, they'll bitch, they'll blame, they'll gaslight, they'll throw fits, they'll do whatever they can to get you to go back to being the way that you were before so that they can feel better because you're helping them out and doing all the things that they need to do. But you stabilizing them isn't your job. You're a human being with your own life and your own needs and all these things that are about you. If you end up just being a jack to hold a off-kilter house up, then you can't have a life of your own. You're stuck now. Only purpose is to lend support to this person. That says that you're not a person and your needs and your life and your dreams don't matter. All that matters is their lack of being uncomfortable. By the way, they're not agreeing to do that for you. They're not lifting you up or doing any of this work for you. They just want all the work going for them. This is not your problem. You did not make them like this. It is not your job to fix this for them. As much as it feels like you want to because you're a good person, you love people, you love them, and you want good things for them. I get that. But you need to also exist for yourself. So part of getting healthier when we've been in these toxic relationships is learning to take back our own lives and to learn to put ourselves needs as equal as everyone else, not less than, not more than, but equal to everybody else. It's hard work when you've gotten used to being supportive and feeling good about being supportive, but meanwhile you're drowning and being overwhelmed and nobody's taking care of you. You kind of get sometimes used to that, but it means you need to be okay. But expect the pressure. Expect the pressure. And the other hard part about this is that people with personality disorders, another way to think of them is not just deficient in skill sets and traits, but they also are emotionally immature. They're like toddlers, literally. Developmentally, psychologists would put their development level, emotional development level, at about a 2 to 3 year old. Not even a teenager. They're about 2 to 3 year old. So if any of you have ever raised one and things are going poorly for a 2, 3 year old, what do? They make holy hell. They make life miserable. They scream really loud for a long time. Now, what do? Well, we as adults know that toddlers do this and we just blank out and we kind of ignore it and we don't pay attention. We know it'll blow over. But when they're a grown person and a grown person's body with a grown person's ability to affect you, it makes it tougher. It makes it a whole lot tougher. That's why it's very hard to ignore all this, because they know how to make you miserable with them. Whereas a 3-year-old, 2-year-old, the most they can do is just get louder and melt down on the floor and maybe throw things, and what can they throw? They don't have a strength of a human. So yeah, I get it. I get this is really challenging. That comes back to learning to how you're going to get space, physical and emotional space from the intensity. I want to talk about, and I know this question just came in about how to deal with somebody who's suffering with being in a narcissistic relationship with somebody else. I get that, but I want to jump into something else. I want to talk about emotional detachment. In a normal relationship, if you want to maintain a healthy relationship, and by the way, this is coming out of John Gottman's work. If you guys don't know who John Gottman is, I highly recommend you check him out. Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. John and Julie Gottman is a couple who've been together for a very long time. They're both researchers. I think they're both psychologists. I got to hear them speak. It's really cool. They did this big analysis of what makes healthy relationships. Why do some relationships work and why do other relationships don't? And they did I think it was 30 plus years of a longitudinal study where they brought couples into a simulated apartment, literally like a home, and then made them have arguments in front of them. And they taped it and then transcribed the arguments. Fascinating. It's just fascinating. What they found out is a couple big things that are really interesting. One is that there are 4 symptoms in a relationship that predicted the high likelihood of failure. Well, 90% likelihood this relationship won't make it. If you saw all 4 of these, he calls them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse out of the Revelations. They are contempt, which is the worst, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Stonewalling, by the way, is not the same as just being emotionally overloaded and overwhelmed and leaving temporarily. Stonewalling is a tactic that one partner uses as a way to control the conversation. It's literally like silence treatment, walking out. It's just shutting the conversation down and stopping it. The other thing he found was what he called emotional bids. We make them all the time. When I went live, by the way, that was an emotional bid I put out to you. Then you decided whether or not you were going to come here or not. Now, I don't have a day-to-day life relationship with you, so you not showing up or you showing up doesn't really powerfully affect me. But say that you live with me and you're my home and I start to read something about I heard today and you shut me down or you walk away and ignore it. They found that you need to act interested in your partner's request for attention. Could be request for sex, could be request to listen, pay attention to a joke, help them out, get a whatever. We make requests of each other's all the times in various ways. You need to be doing that 80% to keep the relationship healthy. If you're ignoring, dismissing, shutting down, or rejecting, and you're not doing enough positive that exceeds 80%, your relationship's going to be in trouble. Thank you so much for joining me here today. So what do you think? Do you think we're overusing the word narcissism? I'd love to hear your opinion. Consider dropping me a note and letting me know. And if you missed Dr. Milstead's webinar last week, no worries. The replay is now available for purchase. To get your copy, see the link in the show notes. And until Monday, bye-bye.